awesome. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about first focal plane versus second focal plane, also called rear focal versus front focal. Which way do you usually call it?
I don't know.
whatever we're talking, right?
First versus second, front versus rear, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's the same.
I'd want to mention too, so we are taking questions. I got live questions right here. So make sure that if you have a question, just type it up to us. I got it live coming up, like I said, and we'll address those questions as we go through. So before we talk about first versus second, we kind of need to talk about how a scope operates, right? How it functions, what the erector system was. I know that was one of the things we put out yesterday. Do people know what an erector system is? I don't think a lot of people actually do. You get the scope and it's this black tube that sits on your rifle and you may not really know what's going on inside. So being the instructor here, I'll kind of let you kind of talk to what what these parts are doing inside the main tube, right?
Sure. Basically what happens is inside the scope you have your erector system, and you have inside of there you have what's called your erector cells, and those erector cells move forward and back, and they move closer, farther away from each other in relation to each other, and that's what really dictates the magnification that you're on. So as you grab your power selector ring, which is going to be your external ring here, and you spin it, basically what you're doing is spinning inside this tube right here, right, which is your cam tube. And that cam tube has two cells inside of it. You can actually see the locator dowel sticking up on it right there. And what that does is that shifts those forward and back. And if you're able to see on the cutaway here, you can actually see the cells moving back and forth inside of there. And as those move towards the front of the scope or towards the rear of the scope and closer or farther apart from each other, that will actually set up what your magnification is that you're on. And on the back here, we've got what's called a pivot seat, and this stays put, and as you dial your elevation and your wind, this moves left and right or up and down, dictating where you're adjusting your scope to make sure that your shot placement is correct. These are our springs that push against there, maintaining resistance and ensuring that we're tracking perfectly as we need to be. So just a couple different examples of erector tubes here and cam tubes and the way that works. So as you grab that outer power selector ring, you spin this tube, the cam tube, and that shifts those erector cells forward and aft inside of the scope. Now, inside of your scope, you've got two different focal planes. And what that means is that as the light and the color comes in through the objective lens, it hits your Barlow lens, which is your side of focus lens, if you have that there, and all that light and color refracts down to a single finite point. And at that finite point, a real image is created there for your eye to see and your brain to figure out what's going on and what you're looking at. And that happens in two locations inside of a scope. It happens at the first focal plane, and then it happens again at the second focal plane. And now, every scope that we make out there that's a variable power magnified optic will have both focal planes. So every single scope is technically a first and a second focal plane. So when we refer to as it a first versus a second focal plane scope, what we're really referring to is the location of the reticle housed within the optic.
Yeah. Just a note too. I know we're horizontal on Instagram. I just got a note. So we'll try to hold stuff up here so you guys can see it so the comments don't. I think you got comments scrolling in front of your face. So. Or go to Facebook too. Yeah, Scott says go to Facebook too if you don't want the comments scrolling there. But when I tell people, yeah, so you got your lens elements there, and the reason that reticle is shrinking or growing is because you're seeing the magnification elements, then you're seeing your reticle, right?
Yeah, so
as opposed to rear focal where you're seeing your reticle first, then the magnification's happening, and that's why it stays the same size.
So those two cells, as they change the magnification, they magnify or demagnify anything that's in front of them. So if your reticle is housed in the first plane, they will magnify and demagnify your reticle in perfect relationship to your image, but if they're behind the magnification cells, then they only magnify your image and your reticle stays a fixed size.
Yeah, correct. So let's see, we got a couple good questions here coming in. Let's see, looking for a front focal plane LRP soon. At low power, is that reticle too small to be seen against the dark background such as trees and shadows? That came from Low Speed High Drag there on Instagram. So good question about application, and we'll talk more about that. But just that's a good segue into that. So
yeah. So looking at your application, there's a lot of places out there, especially if you're reading on the internet right now, that'll tell you that first focal plane is the only way to go, right? You want to be on varsity team, you got to get first focal plane. It's kind of that mentality that first focal plane scope is better than a second focal plane scope, and that's not necessarily true. It's really about proper application of components on the scope, and when we mean components, we mean feature sets on the scope. So figuring out exactly what your needs are and getting the right focal plane optic to fulfill those needs is really the choice here. So you're looking at first versus second focal, and it's a great point that low speed, high drag brought up. Was that right?
Yeah, you were right.
All right.
Shout out, he's famous now. He got his name called out.
Yeah, twice.
Twice.
You're in, bro. So thinking about that, bringing it down to low power, if you have a first focal plane scope, that means that reticle will shrink all the way down with your image. So if your image is getting really small, then your reticle can get very small too. And if you have very thin lines for precise shooting on there, it can get tough in low light. Low light hunting and tight country hunting are both areas that second focal plane could be a better option. And the reason for that is something called the exit pupil. There's a perceived less light coming through the scope going through there, so seeing that reticle becomes difficult. One way that we've chosen to manage that, because that's a legitimate issue, one way we've chosen to manage that is with the new CCH reticle.
Yeah.
And what is really neat about that reticle is as that scope breaks down, as it starts to collapse in, that reticle starts to collapse in, there's three big prominent triangle lines that come through on the sides and the top, creating almost like an inverted German number 4 reticle.
Right.
That gives you extremely good low light capability. The other thing to think about is if you have a first focal plane scope and you have like a 5-25, it probably won't be as prominent of an issue as if you had, say, a 2-12. Right, if you had a first focal 2-12 and you're down to 2 power, which is almost both eyes open, almost no magnification, then that reticle would be pretty much gone for you.
Yeah.
So looking at your magnification window, how low that optic will get as far as magnification goes will dictate how small that reticle will get, and you still might have a prominent reticle based on the reticle choice that you've bought with that scope.
Yeah, so environment does play a role in kind of which tool you're going to choose for the job, right? Which it's a good segue into, I wanted to talk a little bit about why front focal was invented. And you're a retired military, right? You're a sniper, and so that's kind of where it came from, right? So why did they think that, or why did they explore the front focal and kind of go to that route in the military realm?
So one thing that you'll hear commonly in the first focal plane realm is I need to have first focal plane so that I can range estimate on every magnification, which is for the most part a very incorrect statement. Range estimation, first of all, is kind of an archaic skill. We use it, we still teach it at sniper school, right? And that's where you have a math formula. You have the size of your target is known, average width of a man's shoulders, height, whatever it is, car tires, whatever it might be, and you're able to measure that with the tools in your scope, whether that's mils or MOA. Plug that into your mathematical equation and find out the distance to the target. But a lot of people say, well, I need to be able to range estimate on any magnification. And the only people that can really say that are people out there on a professional level that are using an inline night vision, because that inline night vision will limit them to how far they can go, how high in magnification they can go with their day optic behind it. Yeah. But if you're going to range estimate, 99 times out of 100, you're going to want to be on that max magnification. And the reason for that is you have to take a very, very finite measurement of your target. And if you drop that down and change the relationship of your target and your reticle, or if your reticle starts to shrink, you get some mirage out there that's very, very difficult for you to deal with, you're not getting the most perfect measurement you possibly can. And if you start getting out the 600, 700, 800 meter range and you mismill it by 1/10 or even 1/2, that'll input data wrong into your formula, which will give you a wrong distance, meaning you'll dial your dope wrong. So a lot of people say, well, I need it for first focal plane so that I can range estimate on any distance. And well, it won't fit my field of view if I'm on max magnification. Well, I've range estimated an M1 Abrams tank at under 400 meters and it's fit in my field of view. So if it doesn't fit in your field of view, you should stop trying to do a formula and just pull the trigger because it's that close. So the biggest reason why we actually need first focal plane is elevation and windage hold off with the application of field of view. Right, so field of view is a major part of any hunter, any law enforcement sniper, any military sniper. Field of view is a very, very important aspect because you need to make sure that you see that entry team or that assault team coming in. Any perceived threats that could be in that area might want to dial your magnification down. Field of view opens wide up, and then you can see all those threats. and be able to provide proper overwatch, or whatever the case might be. There's a lot of hunters out there that are like, man, I shot this deer, and then right after I pulled the trigger, there was a bigger deer to the right. Well, it wasn't in my field of view.
Right.
That field of view is huge. While dropping down that field of view, the military community utilizes an elevation and windage hold-off style of shooting, where they're not dialing due to rapid transition between distance of targets or whatever it might be, or rapid wind calls, right? They're using a hold-off style of shooting. So they're not dialing, they're using elevation windage hold-off, and they need that elevation windage hold-off to be accurate, those subtensions inside of the reticle, whether they're mils or MOA or whatever they are, to be perfectly accurate, regardless of the magnification setting they're on.
Right.
So when it comes to needing a first focal plane, the one task need for first focal is really hold off shooting.
I gotcha. So, and to back up a little bit, so if you have a second focal plane or rear focal plane scope, you do have to be on the max magnification for that reticle to work the subtensions. Like Michael was talking about, the measuring tool, right? Your tape measure in your scope. That magnification has to be on full power for it to be accurate, whereas the first focal plane, you can be on any magnification. Great question, kind of talking about that on Instagram there. So Jackal, point of aim, point of impact differences. Is there any point of aim or impact differences when you're talking about first versus rear focal plane there?
No, if you're utilizing the center of your reticle, everything's going to be fine. If you go to dial, whether it's first or second focal plane, tracking will be fine.
Yeah.
You just have to know that when you're on second focal plane and say you're able to drop down to exactly half the magnification, now you've doubled the value of the subtensions in the scope. So now every mil will equal 2 mils.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you just have to know your reticle and what its capabilities are as far as where those lines, or where your power selector ring matches up to exactly half or full or whatever it is.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, if you have a point of aim, point of impact as far as the center of the crosshair goes, there's going to be no difference.
Yeah, no difference at all. Good question though, for sure. And Wapati Fit on Instagram, why range estimate when Leupold makes the best rangefinders on the planet? Checks in the mail, that's a great plug. We do make some awesome rangefinders, but you know, batteries die, right? I just think it's like why learn to drive a manual when everything's automatic? There may be a time when you got to drive a manual, right?
You know, we don't even really teach range estimation anymore once you get through a certification school. And what I mean by certification school is a sniper school, SOTIC, whatever it might be. You learn that skill so that you have it, it's in your pocket.
Right.
But like I said before, range estimation is pretty archaic. And the dudes that are actually range estimating more than anybody right now would be the guys shooting NRL or PRS, where there's a stage designed with a range estimation as part of the stage.
Right.
So that's really the only reason you'll need it. As far as I can see, we've got too many other factors, especially with hunting. I mean, you know, I know a grown man's shoulder width on average, but how do you do that with an elk? How do you do that with a bobcat? How do you do that with a deer or whatever? It just doesn't work that well. And all of a sudden you're shooting blacktail one season, whitetail the next, and then a mule deer the year after that. And you go down for a coos deer, nothing works. So you have to have that known target size. So in the hunting arena, it doesn't really work. It doesn't really matter.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. That's good point there. Let's see, on IG, Son of State says, would it be possible to have a scope, let's say, with a mil front focal reticle, except in the center between the innermost markings, a fine second focal plane crosshair? So I think what he's getting at is, could you have a combination of the two, right? Could you maybe have a reticle feature up front and then a reticle feature in the back? Which, yes, that is totally a thing. We don't have anything right now that fits that bill. It's funny, things always come full circle in the optics industry, it seems like. That's actually an old technology. There's an old Redfield, I think it's called the AccuRanger. Some of you old timers type in and tell me that's wrong or right. But it had a wire that went across the front of the erector system with the reticle on the back. So when you would change the magnification, that wire would shrink and grow, and it was a range estimating tool, right? It was a bracketing tool, but that has been thought of. We've messed around with it some, but we don't have anything in production that has that. So let's see. So one of the other things that people see, so the front focal plane costs more than the rear focal plane,
right?
And you know, I think people don't understand the complexities going on. So when on the back, if you put the reticle there, There's some less complex, we'll call it collimation stuff happening up here. But once you put the reticle up front, so you've changed where that reticle is in the system, things become a little more complex, right? Also, the size of it decreases. And that's something with reticles. The smaller the reticle, the more cost is induced, right? It's harder to manufacture that reticle. So there's some added complexities when putting together the scope, the cost of the reticle. Those kind of play into the extra cost of the scope. Good segue, though, into the LRP. So if you guys haven't seen the VX3 LRP that we introduced, last year, I think? So this is our kind of, I don't want to call it entry level, but this is our first focal plane scope that's not going to break the bank, right? It's going to be sub $1,000. You get all the features and benefits that you would have a front focal plane, right? TMR reticle. This one, you actually get the CCH reticle, the reticle that you were talking about earlier. This one actually has it. Your nice big adjustments on there. And a lot of guys, this has been a very popular scope for people maybe wanting to get into that front focal plane realm, right? Yeah. Let's see. It also, I made a note here, it also won Guns and Ammo Optic of the Year last year. Not to toot our own horn a little bit, but that's pretty cool, right? So they recognize too the benefits and the values of that scope. Let's see. Let's take another question here. Oh, this is on Instagram, Snow Pro. How has the scope industry changed from just a 3 to 9 to 40 to the greater powers of say a 6.5 to 20 in getting better coatings for glass? So I think what he's talking about is just the evolution of glass over time. And it's funny, you can take, like a Vari X3. I think when the late 90s, early 2000s, we had Vari X3s, and you look, and that was kind of our high level scope. And now you look at our Freedom scope, our VX Freedom, and if you put two of those side by side, the VX Freedom is a $200 scope. It's going to have a better image quality than that Vari X3. It will be. Right, so it's that evolution of stuff over time.
I think a big part of that is understanding the light spectrum and color spectrum, the visible spectrum of light that we as humans see, and how to manipulate that so that it optimizes whatever time of day we're looking through that optic in, optimize that image quality for our eye. We've also figured out how to manipulate glass better, and as those refractions go through, how to make sure that distortion is completely rid out of that scope. Managing glare is a big part of that. So much of the technology has increased and our abilities with it to make sure that you've got a better quality optic that's a more robust optic that will hold together through lifetimes upon lifetimes of punishment, but give you that really good contrast resolution, that really good light image pop in low light scenarios. It's been really neat to see happen for sure.
And I'll let you guys in on a little secret. This is something I tell people. So I do the tours here too. I take people through the factory and we talk about some optics principles and stuff as we go through. This is really the key to that image quality, that erector system in the scope. The unfortunate thing is this is the thing that you can't see when you buy a scope, right? You don't know what this looks like inside. We got a Mark V main tube here. To me, this is an excellent example. You can take a scope, say one of our scopes, and take a competitor's scope, and they're going to be the same size main tube, maybe the same magnification, and the competitor might have more travel than us. And you're like, why does the competitor scope have more travel? Well, it's because they might have decreased the size of the erector system inside. If you decrease the diameter of that, obviously now I have more room to move around inside the main tube, right? But the problem with that is you degrade your image quality, this being the limiting factor of the light getting to the shooter's eye, right? So that's a good reason we went to a 35mm main tube with the Mark V. We're not going to cut corners on image quality. We got to have the right size erector system to give you that bright image and enough travel in there. So you can tell that to your friends and sound super smart, right? Be like, oh, what kind of erector system does that scope have? Huh? Probably doesn't have too good. So I wish you could open up a scope when you buy one and you could check out the erector system, but you just can't. So again, we're just trying to pull the curtain back a little bit and tell you how these optics are built and how they perform, so you can have a better understanding of what's going on. Intergalactic operator. Oh man, I said that. Jason's gonna troll us right here. So what kind of product do you use in your hair / beard? It smells incredible, by the way.
CLP.
CLP.
It was issued to me.
CLP, nice. Oh, we probably should have a disclaimer. Don't put CLP in your beard. You know, your hair is gonna fall out.
You
Or
do
something.
whatever you gotta do. Whatever.
On IG, Big Grizz, is there a difference in mounting a first focal plane versus a second focal plane scope?
That's a good question, and the answer is no. Basically, a lot of people don't really understand when mounting an optic onto a rifle, it's not just being mounted to the system itself, it actually needs to be mounted to the shooter's body structure, their shoulder structure, how they address that rifle. Because as the light and color comes through this objective lens through the tube, it's going to come out on the other side, on the ocular side, in a definitive, like a definitive disc of light. But there's a box, there's an eye box there. So if you drop it all the way to minimum magnification, that eye box is going to be shifted out as far as it can. As you bring it up, that eye box is going to shift in closer. So what body position puts your head closer to the scope or farther away from the scope on a specific magnification? So when I have people mount scopes, I have them get in the prone on max magnification and make sure that we're perfectly in the eye box so that when they get into a standing position and they're walking from tree cut to tree cut during hunting season, or they're on patrol or whatever it might be, they're going to be living on low power, and if they pull their head up to their rifle, they're going to be further away from the scope, and that eye box will be shifted back exactly where it needs to be so that they have a full scope of light. But that is irrelevant whether it's a first or a second focal plane scope. They both get mounted the exact same way. I have everybody get in the prone on max magnification, and that's how we mount an optic.
Gotcha. Good. Instagram, KMO Archer does a 1600 rangefinder read reflective color targets.
Yes.
Yeah, it actually, so,
Sure.
sure. Actually, reflective targets are the best targets to lays. You're going to get the best reading back. Hide is actually one of the worst things that you can try to range find, because hide isn't going to return. So what you're doing, you're sending out a beam, it's hitting something, that beam is reflecting, coming back to the sensor, and it's the time, right? So the system is measuring the time it takes for that beam to go out, hit it, come back, and that hide isn't a great surface for that laser to hit and reflect back. You probably will get a reading, it just may not be as quick. You might have to try a couple times.
Hide in rock.
Rock's not good either.
It's so porous.
Pitted.
You know, it's pitted. It's got, you know, that it can scatter that beam. So finding a spot on that rock, it doesn't matter how quiet, how quality it is. I mean, if you have some of these $20,000 ones, you can struggle with that easily.
Yeah,
so.
You might even see that on steel target, especially if you've shot it up a lot, right? If you got some pitting in your steel target, you may not get a reading right off the bat. So a little pro tip there. Can you explain how to use the VX6 HD electronic leveling reticle in the field from IG, enjoying the pursuit? So that leveling feature in that VX6 HD is twofold. One, you can use it for mounting. So it allows you to use it when mounting to make sure the scope is level, but also in the field. So it's going to blink at you when you're not level. And when you get back to level, it's going to stop blinking. It's pretty simple, actually, how it operates. So,
yeah, it's real simple.
But Michael he uses that in conjunction with a mounting kit, right? A bubble level and all that kind of stuff too. So.
Yeah, and you're still going to have your rifle level. That's the other thing is you got to make sure that your gun's level, because if your scope is level but your gun was canted on a set of bipods or on a bag when you're trying to level it, you're only halfway there. So you need to make sure that that weapon system's level so that as you use that feature inside there, everything's level to each other.
Yeah, for sure. Another question, Mike on Facebook. Thanks for tuning in, Mike. Is there any plans to change the position of the Windage Turret markings on the main tube? It's only visible when completely behind the scope. So that's a great question. And if you haven't seen the Mark V HD, I'm going to plug that product again, check it out. We actually raised the marking on the turret up higher, so that when you're behind the gun, you can still see that marking. You don't have to, put your head over and see it. So that's the only scope I think that it's on currently.
It is right now, and that actually came from one of our sponsored shooters. Actually, the guy who built all of our custom rifles out at our range is Jared Joplin out at American Precision Arms. We got a rifle back because he wanted a reticle swapped.
Yeah.
And we got this back, and we see this like scratches on like 3 of his scopes. We're like, "What are you doing?"
Took his
he's
knife
like,
out
"Bro,
and just
if I just lift
scratched
up
the
slightly,
turret."
I can look with my left eye and see it." And we're like, "Hey, can we use that?" So that was It's really his idea, and we applied that to the Mark V. As of now, we're probably not going to change that on a whole lot of other scope lines.
Yeah.
But moving forward, we might, because people have really enjoyed that feature. But a lot of times it's, windage on a scope, for the most part now, is a zeroing feature. People have figured out that they're dialing elevation and holding wind. So once they get that windage dialed down and reset to zero, oftentimes a cap will go back on it and they'll never touch the windage again. So it is great if you're utilizing your external dials to dial wind, if you get into a really hard wind, or you're dialing the windage out when you're dealing with moving targets and checking that wind, being able to check it often. But yeah, so moving forward with some of our tactical line type stuff, we might move that mark back up there as well.
Yeah, I could see that happening. That is a great, actually I didn't know that thing about Jared. I didn't know where it came from, but that's awesome to hear. He makes some awesome rifles, by the way. Check it out. But that's a cool instance of listening to an end user, someone who uses the product a lot, and incorporating that into a product, which is really cool to see. Let's see, there was another good question up here. Let's see, the bow hunter athlete on Instagram. How do environments and lighting conditions affect your choice of focal plane? We touched on that a little bit, but I'd like to go back to it even and talk about it a little bit further. To me, so we live in Oregon here. We're in Beaverton. We're in the factory. The coast range is right there. I mean, it's pretty close. That coast range is so brushy. There is so much underbrush, and it's rough country. And man, the first 15 minutes and the last 15 minutes of the day, when it's low light and a lot of brush, I don't think I have second focal plane scopes on all my hunting rifles that I use out in the coast range, right?
Yeah. It's a double canopy rainforest is what we have in Oregon, and it makes it really tough. And if you're not wearing a watch, you get into that situation where you're like, hey, we got to go, we're out of legal hunting light, and you step out of that double canopy jungle and you're going, well, we got like 2 more hours.
It's 3 o'clock in the
there.
afternoon.
You don't realize that. So having that, when we live, one of my favorite scopes that I have for hunting coastal range is a 2.5 to 8.
Yeah.
In fact, it was just readopted by the Marine Corps for their squad designated.
Yeah, the Mark IV. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we have a VX3i version of that, and one of the things that really plays into how much light gets into that scope, like I said before, it's not objective lens diameter, it's not main tube diameter. One of the biggest aspects of that is how many lenses a scope has inside of it.
Yeah.
So if you have a scope with 20 lenses in it, and say each lens has 98% light transmission efficient lens, by the time you hit the second one, you're at 98% of 98%, and then 98% of 98% of 90, all the way back. So you don't have 90% effective light transmission to the end user.
Right.
So part of that is that scope has minimal lenses in it. There's like 7 lenses in that scope total or something. It's a very, very small amount, so there's no light degradation. But I live on 2.5 power on that scope out in the Tillamook Forest, right?
Yeah.
You do too. We get as low as we can. That's why the 2 to 12 is such a great hunting optic, because you drop down to 2, you're almost both eyes open for really tight country hunting. But you get up on 12 power and have that high-end mag that you can move towards. The other thing too is that law enforcement sniper community. We finished 2016. I haven't checked stats for 2017, but we finished 2016 with the average nationwide law enforcement sniper kill of 57 yards. You're not dialing, you're not holding wind, you're not doing anything with a 308 or 6.5 or whatever your respective agency's using, but what you do need is low magnification to see those entry teams coming in, see all those windows and avenues of a threat that might present themselves. So second focal plane for most, and I'm not saying all, this isn't a blanket rule, but for most of the law enforcement sniping community, a second focal plane is a better option because they can be on low, right, even in low light, and have that big bold reticle to them. Now you bump out to someone like a military sniper community where they might need to be on low, but they're hunting big open country, right? And I say hunting because that's what they do, right? They're out in big open country and they're doing their work, but they have to constantly utilize elevation windage hold off because all of a sudden the separation of the distances that they might be engaging targets to. Or a hunter that's hunting deer, elk, whatever it is, but he's hunting or she's hunting wide open country, right? That's another area where you might want to have that first focal plane optic.
Yeah, that makes total sense. One observation that I'm going to make from just my personal shooting on the range and using front focal, we talked there a little about the benefits of second. For me, one of the benefits of first focal plane is, say I'm running a Mark V 5 to 25, right? And I got the power all the way up. It seems like when I'm prone and shooting, that then having the magnification is so high it exacerbates all my movements, right?
It will.
I feel like my breathing, like I can feel myself kind of moving around like this. Your heart rate even, you can see like fluctuations. I feel like sometimes I can knock that power down a little bit, maybe go to 21, 20 power, 18 power, and I can actually shoot more accurately if I knock that power down, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? You think, well, max magnification, I want to knock that thing all the way up and I want to use that. Do you find that too a little bit?
Most people don't realize that that's just kind of a true statement in general. A lot of people they're having trouble getting their shot group down at 100. We do, during our 4-day precision scope rifle class, we do a lot of work on the 100-yard line because that's where you hone your fundamentals.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that'll have their gear on 20 power, 25 power, whatever it is, and it's like, hey, you're having problems with your shot group, let's drop it down to 12. Let's drop it down to 14, 15 power. Let's drop it down to 9 power, whatever it is. And it was funny, I had a guy who is actually my sniper school instructor from years ago. He came up and he and I were doing a class up here, and then we were getting the rifle set up for the mile target because the students wanted to shoot the mile, and this dude jumped on his rifle after he was done, and they were like, all right, and they were like, you were on 9 power. And he was like, yeah, he was shooting a mile at 9 power, and that's he doesn't really go much past 9 power. It's just home for him unless he's spotting for someone else.
Yeah.
So on our spotting scopes, if you look at a student spotting scopes, I guarantee they're going to be pinned at 40.
Right.
But if you look at an instructor spotting scopes, they're all around 12 to 15 is where we live, so we can see trace. A lot of people don't realize that magnification can be a detractor because every little movement gets completely magnified, like you said.
Yeah, and your field of view is lower, like we touched on before. Your field, especially let's say you're shooting match or something, you got to transition between targets. Well, now your field of view is smaller, and I've seen guys do it before, and now they're like moving the scope all around trying to find the next target, where if you backed out that magnification a little bit, wider field of view, now you're going to be able to see, okay, there's that target, I can transition, there's that target, I can transition, right? So something like that. Let's see. What reticle do you prefer in the LRP? Casey on Facebook. I like the CCH. I like a grid reticle myself. I'm going to use this scope mainly for range stuff, probably not so much hunting stuff, for me personally. So I'm going to go with the CCH for that. Grid reticles are they're a little intimidating at first, I think. Guys see them and they're like, man, that's a lot of stuff going on in a reticle. I don't know if I can do that. But once you break it down and really understand, it is one of the best tools for accurate shots and follow-up shots, which I think, right? So being able to get a follow-up shot and know how much you have to, go over.
Yeah, it's huge. That follow-up shot's critical, and it's funny, for years and years in the sniper community, we've always said 1 shot, 1 kill, and then John Wardchild is trying to change that to 1 shot, 1 correction, because that's just the reality of it, right? I don't care what anybody says, that's the reality of it. That follow-up shot, being able to measure a definitive point where you missed and then come over and come up and immediately rapidly take a follow-on shot that can be a deadly follow-on shot is really important.
Yeah.
I prefer a TMR for hunting.
Yeah.
I like the simplicity of it. I love it. If I'm doing any kind of range work, competition stuff, long gun stuff, outside of just hunting deer or elk, I actually prefer a grid reticle and the CCH. Yeah. The nice thing about the CCH, not to put a plug in for the CCH, but one of the things that happens inside, here's your plug seat anyway. Like one of the things that happens inside of a grid reticle is people see it and it just looks like this massive piece of grid paper and they don't know how to break it down. So what the CCH did was they simplified that when it was designed so that instead of having so many lines in there, you're breaking it down, simplifying it, and then subtly those finite tools are available to you if you really, really need to get surgical. But if you're looking for minute of death or minute of kill on deer, elk, man, whatever it is that you're using it for, target, you can rapidly get there and engage your target. And then on that low magnification, we talked about that reticle not being available to you. The CCH has kind of overcome that issue with the big bold 3 lines that kind of creates that inverted German number 4 for you in a low light or close up tight country scenario.
Yeah, the great point about the TMR using for hunting. If you guys aren't mill guys, some of us aren't mills, we like MOA. Check out the TMOA.
Yeah, same thing.
Same thing, right?
Yep.
Same premise, but now you got MOA increments instead of mill increments if you're more comfortable with that. So that's something to check out. Let's see. If you have an impact reticle or some sort of reticle, does the second focal plane need to be on max magnification? Cody on IG. So we do have a number of impact reticles. that are in second focal plane scopes. So again, if it's in a second focal plane or rear focal plane, whatever you want to call it, you do need to be on max magnification for those reticles to sub-10 correctly. I think that's what you were getting at there, Cody. Let's see. So let's see. Anything else that we want to, the overarching theme here is there's no right or wrong answer. I know that's kind of a bad answer, right? But it's the right tool for the right job, right?
Always, always. Figure out your needs, figure out your application, and buy a scope with the right components or feature sets for your application.
Yeah.
And it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. I mean, a lot of people think it is. You buy a Mark V 5-25, and that's phenomenal until you stick it on a 12.5-inch M4. It's not the right tool for the right job, right?
Yeah.
And another thing too is think about when you're looking at a scope for that magnification, first versus second focal. Another massive thing you need to think about is that magnification. Is it going to get low enough for you? A lot of people think, is it going to get high enough for me? But that's something that we've talked about often. Is it going to get low enough for you?
Yeah, which is important. That wide field of view, not wild field of view. That's
wildly wide.
Wildly wide.
Wildly wide field.
Oh my gosh. We got a hat too. So we're kind of wrapping things up here. We're gonna give
also we have a hat.
Also we have a hat. Is this rear or front focal? I don't know.
It's a Leupold.
It's a Leupold. Anyway, let's give this away to one of the best questions here. I really liked the bow hunter athlete talking about the environment and the lighting conditions, talking about how that affects your focal plane choice. So you want a hat, DM us there on Instagram and we'll get the hat out to you. So let's see. I think that's kind of, did you have anything else you want to say about front or second focal? I think we kind of wrapped it up there. Let's see, in the future, so we got a couple topics coming up. We're going to be talking about a range day kit. That's super interesting to me because it's you always go to the range and it's always interesting to see what guys are putting in their range day bags, right? So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. We're also going to be talking about our Twilight Max light management system. Basically the voodoo that we put in the glass to make that image so bright, right? That plays along with the erector system, kind of some similar stuff that we talked about today. But we're going to be doing an episode directly on that. So, and guys, we're always open to your ideas too. If you have interesting topics, ideas, stuff you want to see, put it in the comments, DM us, let us know, and we'll be talking about it. We'll bring in experts like Michael here, LOA, and we'll have a good discussion. So again, I'm going to give another plug to LOA, Leupold Optics Academy. Go on the website, check it out. You guys are going to be really impressed what we got there. Try to make it out to a class. It's going to change the way you shoot, literally. It's going to open your eyes to things that you never thought of before, and it's going to be well worth your while and time. So till next time, we'll see you. Whoa.